Philosophy, throughout the ages, has been the pinnacle of human awareness and thought. Philosophy questions and examines everything we take for granted in our day-to-day lives and forces us to think in abstract and profound ways. While such reasoning has been apparent throughout our entire existence, the Renaissance period in Europe led to a new level of explosions and outbursts of new thought that the world had not seen since the Greeks.
This video will address the following topics within philosophy: philosophy's impact on the Renaissance's impact on philosophy, and the greatest outcome of philosophy during the Renaissance. In addition, four main philosophers and contributors will be discussed, including Demosthenes Plato, Sir Thomas More, Sir Francis Bacon, and Niccolò Machiavelli. This is all to say that the advancements in philosophy constitute the greatest outcome of the Renaissance. Even today, philosophy is used regularly.
It can be argued that philosophy, out of all other fields of study, had the most significant impact on the Renaissance era. For without philosophy, the Renaissance would not have been possible. Philosophy influenced European thought, changing the paradigm from a religion-focused one to one focused on material life and the human experience. The ideal life was no longer one based solely on religion or preparing for the afterlife. Rather, it was also about understanding and enhancing physical life and the human condition. Humanism, the study of man, became the new ideology, and very soon the power and influence of religion, as well as religious institutions and clerics, declined. Examples of this decline can be seen in art, where the focus shifted from predominantly religion to humanity and natural as opposed to supernatural life. This newfound focus on physicality in the natural world created the necessary social and academic environment required to produce groundbreaking achievements in mathematics, optics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, physics, and many more natural fields. Human life was not only improved, but diversified. In fact, it is this diversification of culture and thought that allowed philosophy to influence the Renaissance in the manner that it did. The Greeks laid the required foundations for philosophical expansion during the European Renaissance. As people became more curious and engaged in critical thought, interest in classic philosophical works by great philosophers skyrocketed, and this demand allowed Europe to be bombarded by translated texts from Arabia and the Muslim world. These texts were provided through trading, and trade, historically, has been an effective way of diversifying entire regions and cultures, whether directly or indirectly. Ergo, Europeans and many scholars and polymaths of the Renaissance had contact with foreigners who they learned from and traded with. Thus, philosophy impacted the Renaissance by accentuating the human experience, creating a safe environment for the flourishing of academic thought, and diversifying European society and culture.
The Renaissance itself had a profound impact on philosophy. Truly, philosophical and higher thinking was reborn. Nowhere else was this more clear than with the renewed interest in the Greek classics. People once again studied and sought after such knowledge. In addition, the Renaissance brought humanism, which left philosophy different forever. These advances signaled how intellectual and artistic freedom had overtaken some religious values. As we look at the philosophers of this age, it is clear that many new, religious peoples were able to explore ideas. Catholics, Protestants, materialists, and atheists were all able to bring forward new, logical concepts in their contributions to philosophy. This would not have been possible if not for the acceptance of diverse people which came with the Renaissance. Overall, it was this acceptance of new ways of thinking that allowed philosophy to blossom and spread throughout Europe. It would go on to become a bedrock of Western thought, as the philosophical thinking in the Renaissance helped trigger the Age of Reason. This, in turn, would lead towards rationalism and British empiricism. Empiricism is the doctrine which states that the origin of all knowledge can be found through using the senses. This would all culminate in the birth of the Enlightenment. Hence, it is possible to say that without the rebirth of interest for knowledge during the Renaissance, no thinker or philosopher would have ever become enlightened.
Undoubtedly, the greatest outcome of philosophy during the Renaissance was the development of humanism. Humanism is a doctrine which states that humans, and the study of humans, should be foremost above all else. Humanism stresses that man's problems should fall squarely on man's shoulders, and our successes should be congratulated and not attributed to anything but the truth. Humanism, through rational thought and concise observation, veers away from belief in a higher power. This is a very important turning point in history and truly marks the end of the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were characterized by heavy religious beliefs that limited human growth. However, with the birth of the Renaissance, humanists empowered minds to think in an improved manner, which yielded impressive results. Today, elements of humanism are apparent everywhere. Non-religious novels and artwork such as Huckleberry Finn, organizations such as UNESCO, which focus on human rights, and political documents like the United States Declaration of Independence. Humanism was also the father of many fields of study, such as biology, anthropology, physiology, anatomy, and psychology. This radical doctrine of humanism was undoubtedly the greatest outcome in philosophy during the Renaissance.
Now we will talk about a few philosophers of this period. One such philosopher went by the name Platon. George Gemistus Platon was a Byzantine philosopher who lived during the later years of the Byzantine Empire. He was born in 1355 CE in Constantinople and raised by a Christian family. He studied in Constantinople, then Adrianople, the Ottoman capital, and became a teacher of philosophy. He was a humanist, meaning he adhered to the doctrine of humanism, and despite his Christian upbringing, a worshipper of the Hellenic gods and a believer in various Zoroastrian teachings, ones from the Iranian prophet Zoroaster. He is most well known for his work entitled De Differentis, which compares and contrasts Plato's and Aristotle's views of God. He argues that Plato's view of God is superior to that of Aristotle's because, quote, Plato's view is that God, the supreme sovereign, is the creator of every kind of intelligible and separate substance, and hence of our entire universe, end quote, while Aristotle only makes the claim that God is, quote, the motive force of the universe, end quote. De Differentis reinvigorated humanist interest in Plato, who until then had always favored Aristotle. Platon died in 1452 CE in Mistra Moria, Mistra being a city in the Byzantine province of Moria, and left an everlasting impact on the study of Plato in Europe.
Sir Thomas More was a defender of humanist ideas and a social philosopher who thought about the social possibilities of education. He also wrote about a sort of communist utopia in which all policies were governed by reason, in contrast to the greed and self-interest within some European nations. With the Reformation, Henry VIII founded the Anglican Church. Refusing to convert, Sir Thomas More became a martyr. Today, he is still well respected for his integrity and honor. He was even canonized as a saint in 1935.
One excellent mind produced during this period was Sir Francis Bacon. Bacon took full advantage of society stepping away from the traditional religious attitude apparent during the Middle Ages, and brought forth what was to become known as the modern scientific approach. Born in 1526, he lived a life as a philosopher and politician, serving as the Attorney General and as Lord Chancellor of England. During his time as a man of thought, he utilized the empirical approach to address the world around him. Bacon developed the scientific method based on reason, rationality, and careful observation towards nature. This materialistic approach compelled him to write Novum Organum, a novel on natural philosophy, as well as dozens of other excellent essays and books.
The last philosopher to be discussed is Niccolò Machiavelli. He is likely one of the most well-known philosophers of this time period. He famously philosophized about political theory and what is required to maintain a rule. He also did some work on historiography. Today, he remains known for the doctrine of Machiavellianism, in which users disregard empathy and compassion, instead choosing deception and exploitation in pursuit of their goals. Even today, there exist several Machiavellian rulers, including Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un.
The advancements in philosophy are definitely the most important outcome of the Renaissance. Our world would not be the same if it were not for great thinkers such as Gemistus Plato, Sir Thomas More, Sir Francis Bacon, and Niccolò Machiavelli, who led the foundation for future intellectual progress. Friedrich Nietzsche himself was inspired and reflected upon their works. After all, as Isaac Newton once said, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Intelligence and knowledge are always built upon the works of our ancestors, and those during the Renaissance were no exception.
Today, philosophy is still all around us. Questions of morality and ethics remain part of life. We are even graded on our logic and reasoning when making or explaining arguments. It would indeed be impossible to imagine what our education system, or rather what our lives would look like, if it was not for the intellectual thinking and philosophical reasoning that has led us to live in a more conscientious manner.